For years, I filled every silence with words, explaining myself, softening hard truths, saying what people wanted to hear. I thought that was kindness, but honestly, I was hiding. Then I came across one line from the Buddha, so simple it almost hurt. He wasn't asking us to speak more carefully. He was asking us to stop running from what was real. That one line changed how I listen, how I speak, how I show up. Today I want to give it to you. In the soft light of dusk, a small hermitage sits quietly. A candle flame sways, slowly, gently. The disciples have gathered in a circle, sharing the small moments of their day in hushed voices. Some are laughing, some are silent. One lets out a long, heavy sigh. Then from somewhere in the circle a single voice speaks. Teacher, every day I say, I'm fine, but I'm no longer sure. Am I actually fine? The flame sways again. The Buddha says nothing for a long moment. He simply looks at the disciple's face, not judging, not consoling, just quietly present. The weight of that silence is where this teaching begins. At the edge of the circle, an old monk who has sat with the Buddha for 30 years closes his eyes, not in meditation, but in recognition. He has asked that same question himself once on a rain-soaked road with nowhere left to walk. Outside, a single cricket calls into the dark, and no other answers. The disciple's hands, folded in his lap, loosen slowly, as if something he had been carrying for a very long time has simply been set down on the earth. A novice across the circle watches this, and without knowing why, feels his own shoulders drop. There is a scripture called the Dhammapada. In Pali, the word means verses of the Dhamma, the truth. This is not a dense philosophical treatise. It is a collection of the Buddha's words arranged as short poems, gentle enough to pause with in the middle of an ordinary day. At the very beginning, in the first chapter, there are these lines. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. Mind is chief. Mind-made are they. If one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, suffering follows, as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. Pause. And then right after, if one speaks or acts with a serene mind, happiness follows, like a shadow that never departs. These two verses are mirrors of each other. Words that rise from a troubled heart carry suffering with them. Words that rise from a clear heart carry peace. So, which kind of words is I'm fine? There is a story told of a time when the disciples had gathered around the Buddha, and one of them turned to another. How are you? Is your practice going well? The one who was asked paused briefly, then answered clearly, I'm fine, no problems at all. But the Buddha, who had heard this exchange, asked quietly, What do you mean, I'm fine? The disciple was flustered. It means, nothing is troubling me, really. Is that true? Is there truly nothing troubling you? Silence again. After a long moment, the disciple began to speak, slowly. He admitted that he had not been sleeping well, that he wondered whether he was keeping up with his practice, that he worried he was a burden, and so he had kept saying, I'm fine, over and over to everyone for weeks. The Buddha listened, nodding gently. Then he said, Words are born from the heart. When words are used to hide what is in the heart, a person loses two things. One is the true bond with those around them. The other is their own sense of where they stand right now. The disciple's eyes filled with tears. Then what should I have done? The Buddha answered just as quietly. When you are able to say, I'm not fine, you finally stand in a place where help can reach you. That is not weakness. That is what we call right speech. Pause. Elsewhere in the Dhammapada, there is this verse. One who speaks the truth does not get angry. One who gives when asked, gives freely. One who speaks only truth and never falsehood, that person is called wise. There is nothing wrong with the words I'm fine. When you genuinely are fine, I'm fine is an honest, clean expression. But when you are not fine, and yet the words come out anyway out of habit, or to protect someone, or to hide your own softness, they come from a different place. And like a wheel tracing the groove worn into the earth, those words quietly, steadily, begin to build something heavy inside you. A man once came to a teacher and said he had been saying, I'm fine for so long, that he had begun to believe it, not because things had improved, but because he had simply forgotten what it felt like to check. The teacher picked up an empty cup and filled it slowly with water, past the brim, until it spilled across the table. The cup did not say it was full, the teacher said. It just overflowed. Honesty, it turns out, is not always a door we choose to open. Sometimes it is a seam that quietly splits on its own. And when it splits, there is often someone nearby who notices. A friend who catches the tremor in your voice, a colleague who sees you staring at nothing, a stranger on a bus who simply meets your eyes. They did not ask the right question. You did not plan to answer. But something true moved between you anyway, the way heat moves through a wall without anyone opening a door. When the Dhammapada says mind is the forerunner of all actions, it means more than simply that the state of your heart determines the words you choose. It also means the opposite is true. The words you speak begin to shape the state of your heart. This is the part that matters most. Why does saying "I'm fine" over and over make things harder, not easier? Not because you're struggling, but because you've placed yourself in a situation where you must keep struggling while also saying you're not. If we trace the cause and effect of that pain, it looks like this. The suffering itself simply exists. It is just there. But when we layer onto it the belief that I must not show weakness, or I cannot be a burden, or I must always be fine, the suffering doubles. The first layer is the situation itself. The second layer is the force of trying to press yourself into a shape that says everything is okay when it isn't. The Dhammapada saw this doubled suffering clearly, even 2,500 years ago. Words spoken from a corrupt mind bring suffering in their wake. This is not a moral lesson about honesty. It is something more precise. When what you say and what you carry inside begin to drift apart, a crack forms between them, and that crack, quietly but certainly, wears you down. There is one more layer worth sitting with. When we keep saying "I'm fine," what exactly are we protecting? Most of the time, our image of ourselves, the version of us that holds it together, that never burdens anyone, that stays positive. But consider for a moment, is that always fine self truly you? When you follow the Dhammapada's teaching to its root, something like this comes into view. The self is not a fixed thing. It is what arises moment by moment from the meeting of countless conditions, your body's state, the mood of the day, the people around you, the air in the room. If that is so, then protecting the image of a self that is always fine becomes something else entirely. An exhausting effort to maintain a fixed portrait of a person who doesn't actually exist. Among the Buddha's Eightfold Path, there is a practice called right speech. It does not mean using beautiful language. It means this: bring what is in your heart and what comes out of your mouth as close together as you can. The smaller that gap, the lighter the heart becomes. That is what right speech means. "I'm fine" is not the problem. The question is simply, is that what your heart is actually saying right now? That is where the Buddhist inquiry points. A monk once described it this way. He had spent 3 years telling everyone he was at peace, and by the end, he could no longer remember what peace had actually felt like. The words had not protected the feeling, they had slowly replaced it. What remained was only the performance of peace, hollow as a bell with no metal left. Right speech in this sense is less a discipline than a kind of returning. The way a river, however long it has been dammed, will eventually find its way back to its natural course. A single honest sentence, even an awkward one, even a sentence that trails off unfinished, can begin to close that crack the Dhammapada describes. Not because honesty is a virtue to be achieved, but because the heart already knows what is true, and it is tired of pretending otherwise. Take a moment to think about how often you say, "I'm fine," in your daily life. Say your manager stops by your desk and asks, "How are you doing lately? You okay?" Maybe you haven't slept well. Maybe there's a project that won't move forward no matter how much you think about it, and it keeps you up at night. Maybe you are, quietly, close to your limit. But you say, "I'm fine," with a small smile. The moment passes, the conversation ends, your manager leaves, reassured. But something shifts inside you. One more small weight is added. The quiet heaviness of, "I couldn't say it again," and the next time someone asks, that weight makes it just a little easier to say, "I'm fine," without thinking. This is what the Dhammapada means by the wheel following the groove in the earth. One word carves a path, the next word deepens it. Without noticing, "I'm fine" becomes the only answer available. Pause. The same thing happens at home. A child, a partner, someone who loves you, notices something is off and asks, "Hey, you seem quiet. You okay?" Part of you wants to talk, but you think, "I don't want to worry them," and say, "Just a little tired, I'm fine." They look slightly uncertain, then quietly let it go. What might they be feeling in that moment? Perhaps very quietly, they think, "This person doesn't talk to me about the real things." In the instant you said, "I'm fine," a thin wall may have risen between you. Through the lens of interconnection, the Buddhist idea that we arise through our relationships, this is what is at stake. When you reach towards someone with honest words, that reaching is part of what makes you who you are. When words are used to close that connection off, what is lost is not only your bond with that person, the place where a self that can speak honestly stands becomes a little thinner too. Pause. You are the one asking. A friend clearly seems off. You say, "You okay?" They say, "Yeah, I'm fine." How often do we simply let that be? The Dhammapada says, words spoken from a clear heart bring happiness in their wake. This applies not only to our own words, but to how we receive the words of others. Choosing to look gently at what might live beneath someone's "I'm fine," that too is a path toward bringing words and hearts a little closer. "I'm fine" can become a kind of armor. It keeps out the hurt, but armor that blocks the cold also blocks the warmth. Consider a friend who every time you meet, reassures you with that same bright smile and says everything's good. One day, months later, they tell you they almost didn't make it through last winter. And you remember how many times you heard "I'm fine" and nodded. The warmth you could have offered was ready in your hands the whole time. You didn't know, and that not knowing was not a failure of love. It was a failure of language on both sides. Perhaps they too were waiting for someone to ask one more time, to sit down instead of moving on, to let the silence stretch just a little longer until something true could surface. So, if you were to try just one small thing, starting today, what the Buddha encouraged his disciples to practice was right speech. Not grand confessions, not pouring everything out at once, just closing the distance between your heart and your words a little at a time. In practice, it looks like this. The next time someone asks if you're okay, before you automatically answer, pause for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, look inward. Are you actually fine? A little tired, maybe? Is something not quite going the way you'd hoped? If you notice something like, "I might not be fine," try putting it into words, just slightly honestly. "I'm actually a bit tired. There's something I've been quietly worrying about." That's enough. You don't need a solution. You don't need to say everything. Just close the gap between what is in your heart and what comes out of your mouth, even by a little. There's another practice worth trying too. The disciples of the Dhammapada are said to have kept a quiet habit at the end of each day. They would sit and gently review the words they had spoken. What did I say today? Did those words come from my heart? Tonight, before you fall asleep, look back over your day. If there was a moment when you said, "I'm fine," just hold that moment for a second. How were you, really? You don't need to judge yourself. You don't need to fix anything. Just look. Seeing clearly is where everything begins. I won't promise that this will change everything, but you may find yourself noticing the gap between your heart and your words just a little more. And as that awareness grows, the words you reach for may begin to shift, quietly, over time. That is Buddhism's quiet, modest answer, not a sudden transformation, more like the way frost melts from a window. You don't see it happening, but one morning the glass is clear. A monk in the forest doesn't wake resolved to be different. He simply tends the fire that's already there. And perhaps that is enough, to tend it. Not to force the flame higher, but to notice when it has grown small. When was the last time you told someone, honestly, that you were not okay? And when you did, what did their face look like? There's no need to rush toward an answer. Just take a small moment and let yourself remember. A woman once told me she hadn't spoken those words in 11 years. Not because no one had asked, but because she had grown so skilled at the smile that preceded them that even she had forgotten it was a mask. She said the strangest thing happened when she finally did speak them. The other person exhaled, as if they too had been holding something. That exhale, she realized, was not pity. It was recognition. Two people, standing on opposite sides of the same river, suddenly seeing each other through the fog. If today's teaching touched something in you, we explored why admitting weakness is so hard and so necessary in a previous episode. I'm fine is not a bad thing to say. When you genuinely want to put someone at ease, those words can be an act of warmth. When you truly are fine, they are simply honest. But when I'm fine becomes automatic, when it starts coming out even when it isn't true, it may be quietly building a thin film between you and the people around you. The Dhammapada taught this. Mind shapes words, words shape actions, actions shape the way we live. If that is so, then making one word just a little more honest may be connected, in some small but real way, to shaping a slightly different life. When you can say, "I'm not fine," you stand in a place where someone else's hand can reach you. That is not a place of weakness. It is where connection is born. Thank you, quietly, for staying with this to the end. May the words you speak today come from a place just a little closer to your heart. A monk once said that the truest offering we can give another person is simply to let them know where we actually are, not where we think we should be. Like leaving a lamp on in a window, it asks nothing, but it makes finding the way home possible. Perhaps that is enough. Like leaving a lamp on in a window, it asks nothing, but it makes finding the way home possible. Perhaps that is enough. And perhaps somewhere today someone is waiting, without knowing they are waiting, for exactly that light from you. May today's words quietly take root within you. One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.